ABC7 presents Eyewitness Newsmakers with Adrian Alpert.
Today on Eyewitness Newsmakers, we close the books on another legislative year for the city of Los Angeles, asking if those books can be saved from running with red ink. Our roundtable, the City Council leadership, President Eric Garcetti, Council members Jan Perry and Dennis Zine. We'll examine the aftermath of Occupy LA, both from its message and from its cost, to a city warned it's facing a budget gap of more than $70 million. And among our topics, the DWP, rate hikes, and a ratepayer advocate. We were talking about an advocate last year. Why isn't there one yet? Good morning, I'm Adrian Alpert, and this is our 7th LA Year in Review, our last with this group at the round table. Council President Garcetti hands over the gavel in January. Councilwoman Perry served most of this past year as President Pro Tem, and still serving for now is Councilman Dennis Zine. Thank you for joining us all this morning, and we also need to acknowledge that both Council members Garcetti and Perry are running for mayor. Mr. Zine is seeking the office of Controller, but we are here today to look back on the year and to look ahead for the City Council. And with that, let us get into our first topic, Occupy LA. The costs, first of all, and the message. What message? It was first embraced by most of you here at this table. Mr. Garcetti, you first on that one.
Well, you know, the frustration that people feel out there, regular Americans, veterans who are coming home from wars and can't find jobs, people who are graduating from college with good degrees and can't find any work, teachers who have been laid off, those frustrations continue. And I think Occupy was a manifestation of that. People who are fed up that there's too much power concentrated in too few hands in this country. But now, you know, the work has moved from protesting outside to coming actually indoors. City Hall, just this week, for instance, we took up the mortgage crisis. We addressed the idea of corporate personhood and whether free speech is about how much money you can spend in a campaign if you're a company versus an individual. Those are real issues that Americans still want confronted. And to me, the work has always been about that. The protest was an important voice, but now it's going off the lawn and moving into the halls of City Hall.
I'd like to give each of you, Ms. Perry first, a chance to weigh in on that as well.
Well, I think it's important to protect people's rights to free speech and to provide a space, a public space, where they can engage in the practice of free speech. The issue of the damage to property is now one that we'll have to confront, and it's an unfortunate byproduct of that, but moving forward, the northern lawn, we have already gotten plans in place to replant it and do it with drought-tolerant planting. So that will be underway as soon as it's safe to go in there and begin that. And now we have to work to find funding for the south lawn to restore that.
Councilman Zine.
Well, it lasted way too long. 2 months is way too long. We understand the Constitution, people's right to protest. They have that right. And I came out days after saying we heard their message. They don't like Wall Street. They don't like the banks. They don't like foreclosures. We understand that. There's not much we can do about Wall Street, not much we can do about the banking industry. And it was time for them to move on because we heard their message. But the concern now is the 1,400 officers, how are we going to compensate them, refurbishing the parkland around City Hall, which is in Councilmember Perry's district, to try and find the dollars to make it happen. But their message is not only here, it's local. And I also want to commend the LAPD. The group was dispersed without violence, as we've seen in other parts of this country or this world. So congratulations to the LAPD, doing a great job. And those issues we will discuss, we'll try to resolve. But we can't fix the banking industry. We can't fix all the foreclosures. We've heard their concerns. We've heard their cries for change. We want to make it a better place for everyone.
Well, there's been some discussion, though, about the fact that this was allowed to go on for 2 months. And I haven't heard a hard cost. It's over $1 million to easily put this back right.
But to put this in context, when we had the Democratic National Convention, and some people were saying, get them out of there, move them out quickly. We saw in Oakland the violence and other places. To Dennis's point, it was so important that this be peaceful. Just in my first year on council, and I didn't serve during the Democratic National Convention, we settled tens of millions of dollars of lawsuits when there is violence in those civil unrest situations. And so, you know, even if people didn't agree with the Occupy folks, to have moved them out violently would have cost us much more probably than $1 million of the time spent there.
Well, I think people are questioning the cleanup, the toxic cleanup as it was. And to go forward, what about another group now that once you get this all put back together, who may want to occupy, whose message you don't particularly want to hear? What are you going to do about that?
Let me say this real clear. The park closes at 10:30. We will make sure that law is enforced. Once you open the door and permit it to happen, 1 day, 2nd day, 3rd day, 2 months, The laws have to be enforced. The park closes at 10:30. People will be removed at 10:30. We're not going to let this happen again.
So that was I was going to ask. Was it safe to say that this was the last Occupy around City Hall, around the clock?
Yeah.
We don't allow camping in public spaces. I represent Skid Row, and that has been an issue that has been a bone of contention since I was first elected. And so we reached a settlement on that, and my concern was that we would undermine our own settlement in allowing people to camp. So I don't think we will engage in this type of practice again.
Yes, I mean, continue to speak out, but no more camping out.
One of the messages going forward, though, was something to do with how the city deals with banks and certain banks. It would be over $50 million, I believe, if it were to be that you pulled out of some of the banks that have had questionable practices, according to Occupy LA or all the other protesters. That's not what you're going to do. What message came from that, and what are you doing that has some direct correlation with Occupy LA?
Well, there is a responsible banking ordinance that we're considering. And in the simplest terms, I think all folks in Los Angeles want to make sure we're putting public taxpayer money in banks that are doing the best for the community, whether that's investing in nonprofits, whether that's reducing the principal of mortgages right now that are another bubble about to create havoc in our city. We want to make sure that we are reinforcing those banks that are doing a good job with that and to get those statistics and that feedback. So we're looking at drafting something with our city administrative officer that will give us as policymakers the decision-making power that communities want to make sure we're not rewarding bad banks, but rewarding good banks and putting our money there.
And there are good banks in Los Angeles that have given thousands, if not millions of dollars to nonprofits that have helped nonprofits, and we work with those banks. But the banks that are not following the rules, and there's federal rules, there's state rules, they regulate, and there's a lot of regulation, but there's been a lot of abuse. You look at people who are getting kicked out of their homes, that affects a lot of people. When teachers lose their jobs and police officers lose their jobs and municipal employees can't pay the mortgage, the banks have to be a little more understanding and sympathetic and not just carte blanche move people out.
Well, could this ordinance, if approved, cause the city to pull money out of some of these banks?
Well, I think we have to be very careful of that. We can't do anything to increase our deficit. And that should be our guiding principle there. Nothing that increases our deficit. We're already in a dangerous position. We certainly can't make it work. There's nothing wrong with creating a system where we have greater reporting, more disclosure on behalf of banks so that we know that from a policy perspective we are headed in the right direction. But as far as doing something draconian to hurt our budget, that would be folly.
And we're facing a $70 million gap between now and the end of June and a $250 million gap starting July of next year. So we've got to be conscious of that. We need to provide the services and work with the institutions that are there.
That was going to be my very next round of questions.
I didn't see your notes.
But very good, because City Administrative Officer Miguel Santana tells you all that $72 million is being faced in this mid-year assessment.
Yep, right.
Mid-year. Mm-hmm. Is this, President Garcetti, completely surprising to the council?
No, I mean, each year we've seen, as we look for the economy to come back, that it has been a much longer and slower recovery. But I'm very proud of the work that we've done in council and the mayor. We're one of the best cities in America in terms of reducing our pension costs and our health care costs, over $500 million that we've already negotiated and had ratified by our city employees.
Over this past year?
Over the past year and a half. And we've reduced our workforce, non-police and non-firefighters, because we wanted to keep them strong. But the civilian workforce has been reduced by 5,000 people to the level that it was when Tom Bradley left office, even though we have 1 million more people. So we have to do more with less, but we're managing to protect those core services and balance our books.
And if the courts say the Community Redevelopment Agency money goes back to the state, what happens to the deficit then?
Well, you know, with the using tax increment was our tool, our greatest tool to create economic development in underserved and disadvantaged communities, to be able to build affordable housing and mixed income housing. So if we lose that completely, we are stripped of a very, very important tool, and then we will not be able to build to accommodate the growth in population and the need in everyone's community. And so what that does, what it does to the deficit, you know, it's a different stream of funding, so it doesn't necessarily impact that in an adverse way, but we lose overall as a city.
Final word, Mr. Zine, more cuts, though, could be if this deficit can't?
It could be scaling back on certain issues, and we need to make sure within our budget, we can't be like the federal government where we have $14 trillion deficit. We can't do that. We will have a balanced budget that will be maintained by the mayor and by the city council. There may be cutbacks. There were furloughs at one time. We will have a balanced budget one way or another.
All right, we have to take a break right now, but the DWP and a rate hike, what's going to go on with that? Eyewitness Newsmakers will be right back.